biggest misconceptions outside of the world language community is that all we do is teach words and structures.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Right?
Say it again.
And
You should look like
we
it.
teach so much more than words and structures. And
Yes.
we teach cultures, we teach durable skills, we teach, all kinds of things. And I think, not that I want to point fingers or lay blame, but in a way, I kind of blame ourselves.
Where literacy evolves with technology and language proficiency. This is the Multiliterate Mind podcast with Dr. Liza Trejo and Marnina Falk Colman.
Hello, and welcome to the Multiliterate Mind. I'm Dr. Liza Trejo, and I'm joined by my colleague, Marnina Falk Colman.
Hi, Liza.
Hi. Together, we are exploring how language proficiency, multiliteracy, and human connection are evolving in an AI-driven world. We are so excited to welcome our guest, Lauren Rosen.
Welcome to the podcast, Lauren. We're so excited to have you join us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Before we dive in, we're going to give our listeners a bit of background about you. So I'm going to kick it off to Liza to do that.
Well, Lauren Rosen directs the University of Wisconsin Collaborative Language Program and is the current president of the International Association for Language Learning Technology. She has over 30 years as a language educator and language technology integration specialist, supporting world language educators. Her research focuses on the impact of emerging technologies in developing language proficiency. So a very timely topic for us. So we're excited to hear from you, Lauren.
Totally. And to kick it off, I know you've spent over 3 decades working at the intersection of language education and technology. I'm so curious what first drew you to that work, and how has your thinking about language learning changed over time as the field has evolved?
So I guess, it all started just being the type of person that, well, first off, I had years as a camp counselor, that kind of stuff. And I was always looking for ways to motivate kids and have fun with them, that, getting them engaged and that sort of thing. And I also, so the language piece came in. I feel in some ways I if somebody said, so where'd you grow up? And then you usually say where you were born. I feel like I grew up in Spain. I was born in Missouri. I lived there for 17 years. And then I went on this 7-month experience just living with a family in Spain. And I feel at 17, and I feel like that's where I really grew up, where I really got to understand, navigating society and cultural norms somewhere else, and understanding the sort of different ways that people look at the world. And that for me was super powerful. So I knew I wanted to involve myself in something that was going to have a bigger understanding than the tiny town that I grew up in with, 260 kids in my graduating high school class kind of thing. I knew I needed to go bigger than that. And when it came to teaching, I knew I wanted to come up with ways to motivate kids. Now, we're talking back in the late 80s. So I looked at an overhead projector and I'm like, okay, how can I get interactive with an overhead projector, right? One of my first presentations, and I just love to say this because it seems so silly, was 50 things you can do with an overhead projector at our, state language teacher conference.
Wow. You obviously started teaching when you were 10 years old, right?
Yes, exactly. But it was really just, how can I think outside of the box with whatever I have available to me? And, when we think of technology, if somebody says technology today, they're going to think of a phone, or they're going to think of a computer or something like that. But back in the day, a pencil was technology. A blackboard was technology. So it's here are my tools. Computer happens to be another one of those, right? And so here are my tools. What can I do with them? And how can I have students interacting with them so that they're engaged in whatever the learning happens to be? So that's kind of beginning.
Wow. So I love that 50 ways to use an overhead projector. That's a lot of creativity right there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
still have that in a file somewhere in my office. But yeah, and then from there, as technology evolved, we had a textbook that had one of those big floppy disks with a tic-tac-toe game on it. And I'm like, well, let's give that a try, and so we started using that. And, one thing led to another. After I was teaching for a bit, I decided to go get a graduate degree, and it was in the teaching of second languages and cultures with an emphasis in technology because educational technology didn't exist yet. I was lucky that I had an advisor that was very open-minded, and I built a little piece of software. She had no idea how to do that kind of stuff, but she was enough of a growth mindset to be open to being, okay, I have no idea how you did this, but I can see, the value in it. I can see how students could learn from it, how they could practice on their own using it, and then take what they've been practicing and bring it into another context. And so that was encouraging. And I think a lot of what shaped me was, and my ability to do that, was the educators that I had that were supporting me and that were open to letting me evolve kind of with the times. And I have a couple of different mentors also that were teachers of mine that later, when I started working at the UW, came to me and said, I've heard about this worldwide something. Can you tell me what this is? And that was like a former professor of mine that I consider a mentor, And so it sort of just, and that was before there was a degree in educational technology. So I was kind of like figuring it out as I went along because there wasn't stuff out there.
You sound like such an innovator for like already, just from even just the way that you describe pencil and a blackboard being technology, and then taking, your interest and your curiosity and your desire to help students get engaged, and then your willingness to just explore and to try and to risk take. That's what's standing out to me from what you're saying, and I can't help but giggle because I'm thinking about, I'm totally dating myself, but I mean, I remember dial-up internet. When that was a big thing, and I was Marnina and I were laughing when we were prepping for this because I was saying, wow, my first educational technology class when I was doing my MAT back in the early 2000s was, I can't imagine how different that is from what you're teaching now in your in your class. And so that's
Yeah.
something that I know we're going to be curious to hear more about is that evolution. And so just how you've come to it is fascinating, and then what that evolution is going to be is something I know we're curious to hear more.
Yeah, so
Well,
can you speak a little bit to like how that, like what does
how
that
that
even look
happened?
like?
Yeah. So after I got my graduate degree, I got this job working in the language lab. Well, it wasn't really a language lab. It was a humanities lab at University of Wisconsin, Madison. And at that time, it was mid 90s. World Wide Web was available, but people didn't. A lot of people still didn't know about it, and certainly didn't know how to use it. And I was just new in a position that, fortunately, I was able to allow my interests and my pedagogy to evolve there. So I was sort of, though they didn't really call it this, I was a language technology integration specialist that sort of was the intermediary between all of the language faculty and the technology people for the humanities or the College of Letters and Science, because I understood both technology and teaching. And so that's kind of how I bridged that gap. And because it was the mid 90s and the World Wide Web was just coming out and I was very interested in it, I taught myself how to code in basic HTML. And so I'm like, okay, so I know how to do this. And I know if I were one of these language teachers at the UW that had at that time, I don't even remember how many languages, it would be really nice to have authentic resources to use and not have to wait for the newspaper that you ordered that's going to come by mail and the news is a month too late, right? So I created a series of pages, which is probably still out on the internet because I never took it down, but it was called Language Links. And it was like every language that was offered at the UW and a series of links to websites, most of which, if this is still out there, which I suspect it is, most of the links are probably dead by now. But it was like newspapers and whatever materials I could find that I thought would be helpful to a teacher teaching that language. It was all receptive skills because you couldn't interact with it in any way. It was like things you could read. And so then it was, teaching teachers how to integrate these authentic resources. So it was always based in that pedagogy. It was just a matter of being able to get the materials to them, in an easy way. And then, of course, over time, we got to the point where you could create self-check exercises, knowledge checks. And now with audio and video and text, you can get any kind of input you want. And you can easily using, whatever WYSIWYG editors or, H5P and create interactive activities with feedback around these authentic materials. And just the thought of that at the time that could be coming or that could be possible was mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing, So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that have really changed the game for what language learning looks like over the years. And it just keeps going, and it becomes available in remote areas and rural areas. So it makes language learning that much more accessible. And it also, brings, because of the connection internationally, you can bring people into your classroom. I mean, that was unheard of when I was a language learner.
Mhm.
Maybe if you were lucky, you had a teacher that happened to have come over here from some other country, but not typically. And a lot of them had minimal experience because they, going abroad was not an easy thing to do back in the 70s,
Yeah.
you know?
I
So
love that
just,
you talk about this idea of access, and you're also talking about using technology to kind of fill the gaps of what you're looking for to provide for your students, to create the resources that you need to have. And back in the day, that was to create the authentic resources. And now I'm hearing you say a lot about create that interaction, that feedback, that access. When you're looking at technology tools or resources for the language classroom, what do you center? How do you kind of vet or prioritize or select, what do I need and what am I going to use? What is that thought process? Because I hear a lot of centering best practices, centering proficiency. How does that look for someone that's been a pioneer in technology and really has thought through not just using technology for technology's sake, but finding the right tools for learning?
I'm chuckling a little bit because I can, as I'm formulating an answer to that, I'm also thinking about how, like at ACTFL or something with a big exhibit hall, I can be a vendor's total nightmare.
Elaborate
Because
on that. Why is that?
because I will ask these very pointed pedagogical questions
Ah,
and look for how they respond. And so when I'm looking, first I have to have a problem I'm looking to solve, right? A
Mm-hmm.
pedagogical problem that I need to solve, and I'm looking for something to help me solve that problem. So I'm coming in it from that angle. The pedagogy is always at the base of anything that I do. So depending on what the product is or whatever that they're selling, I learn about it, and then I start asking very pointed questions. Does it do this? What about doing that? What would happen in this scenario? And I've had enough I guess, actual experience with students and in the classroom and working with educators that I have all those kind of scenarios in my head. And then, some vendors will be like, yes, it does. Let me show you, and some vendors will be like, that's a really interesting idea. I'm going to, write that down and we should look into that because you're right. We do need to do that. And some are like, yeah, no. Okay.
Wow, okay.
So we don't go down that road, or, we don't, in my case, because I deal with a university system that teaches lots of languages. If whatever their product does is not made in such a way that it can be used in the languages that we're working with, then I am done with that. The ones
Right.
that just do Spanish, French, and German or whatever, they're not going to be helping me because I need to look, if my budget is as limited as it is, I need to get something that's going to support all of the languages I need, not just a couple of them, and then buy something else for these others, right? So when I go into those conversations, there's also a certain level of interpersonal engagement that I'm having with these vendors. And underneath it all, is this somebody that I feel that I can work with? Are they
Mm-hmm.
open-minded? Are they looking to grow their idea? I look at those things as well, because I have very little budget. So if I'm going to spend what little money I have on something, I need to know that it's going to be something that I can really work with, people that I can really work with, not just a sales pitch, but what's beyond the sales pitch. And is this something that we can grow with? Because if I'm going to go through the trouble of really working with this product and with the teachers, teaching them how to use it well, I can't have it disappear. And if they're going to take the time to learn it, they can't be learning something new in maybe a new way to use a product that they're using, but they can't be changing products every year.
Right.
And trying to, and so it's that kind of thing. And then this is going to sound so weird and I can't explain it, but way back when MOOCs were a big deal, and everybody thought distance learning, it was gonna go to MOOCs. Everybody's on board with MOOCs, and I was like, that's not gonna last. And and same thing with Second Life. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I can see its value, but that I don't see that lasting in the large picture of education. And what happened was kind of what I was thinking. So like with MOOCs, because they were free and giant and quite impersonal in a lot of cases, people would start them and the majority would either get what they needed out of them and leave before they completed the course, or they would sign up for it and then never make the time for it because there wasn't enough of an interactive involvement sort of community check in a lot of them, right? So I saw that happening. And then with Second Life, at least when it first came out, I have no idea if it exists anymore in any other rendition, but you had to learn to type sort of a code in order to like get your avatar to move in a certain way and to have these conversations. And so people would be so busy having to learn how to do that coding that you weren't getting to the true language use. So for the purpose in becoming proficient in a world language, that just wasn't, it was too extra in my mind. Some people got into it and they built, like a cafe in Paris where their students could go sit and have a conversation. But by the time a lot of that came around, you could also do a FaceTime or a Zoom call or something with a real person in a different country. So why do I need to go to this little fake cafe as an avatar and learn to type certain coding language to interact when I can just Zoom call somebody in Uruguay?
We spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about proficiency.
We sure do. But Knowing about proficiency and actually applying it can sometimes feel like two different things.
I know. That's exactly why Avant created Avant Advance.
Advance is an on demand course that deepens your understanding of proficiency levels while giving you practice analyzing authentic student writing samples in your selected language. It's available in 10 languages and counting.
Amazing. So you're not just learning about proficiency, you're practicing how to interpret it with confidence and given strategies to apply the learning directly to your classroom.
You can even earn up to 15 PDUs, and you'll earn a certificate upon completion of the course.
Learn more at avantassessment.com/advance.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you want that adaptability, that flexibility, and you're really looking for what I'm hearing today is that interaction piece because we have so much at our fingertips in terms of authentic resources to consume. I'm hearing a digital tool is something that goes beyond that and creates some sort of interaction. What are some of the problems you've solved with technology recently? Because I hear you think about problems. Could you give an example of one?
Yeah. So one of the big ones, and this is where, fast forward to today, where AI is just game changing and the stuff that's coming out that you can do with it.
Yeah.
One of the hardest skills to teach, in my opinion, and most important skills to teach is interpersonal communication. To be able to have a back and forth conversation like we're having right now is what students want to be able to do the most. And it's the hardest one to teach. So technology can help make that happen so that, a traditional classroom, like very traditional, where you're meeting 5 days a week for 50 minutes, whatever, the actual number of speech acts that any student has is actually very few.
Yeah.
And then if you add up the student who's shy or and doesn't raise their hand, that's even fewer, right? Technology is allowing us to have students practice speaking outside of the classroom so that they can get not just minutes, but even up to hours if they want of practice listening and speaking digitally to prepare for real people communications. Like I'm working at a restaurant and all of the cooks are from Pakistan, or whatever. And I want to talk to them. I want to get to know them because they're my coworkers. Or I went on this trip and I got dropped down in Shanghai and I got pickpocketed. Now what do I do? Right? Whatever the problem is, it always takes some form of interpersonal communication to solve it. So how do we get more of that?
Right.
And what can I use to help students get more of that? Because the more they practice it, the more comfortable they get, the more confident they are, the more they develop their own personal vocabulary. I mean, English right now, English is a huge language. There's a gazillion words, but I only speak within this smaller range of that gazillion, right? And my words are not just the same as your words are. There are certain ways that we express ourselves. Well, if a student can independently be working on that, they're also going to be developing their own personal vocabulary in the language they're learning. And that's really powerful. And that's something you can't do just with sticking to a textbook and what's happening in 5 days a week in a 50-minute class.
Well, that's very powerful. And I that leads me to my particular passion, which always has to do with literacy and multiliteracies. And so we know that research shows that oral language really affects students' ability to read. So if they're in, especially in the second language, in the first language as well, but especially in the second language. So if they're able to say more, so you were talking about this interpersonal ability to
Mm-hmm.
talk. So if they're able to say more, they're actually also going to be stronger readers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are you noticing in terms of literacy as you've had this career with technology, um, language teaching technology to language teachers, and you highlighted the interpersonal skills, which is super important, but that also leads to literacy skills. Do you
Mm-hmm.
have any observations on AI in literacy, or just any of your experiences of how that can affect literacy for
Mm-hmm.
students in the second language especially?
Right. So I want to first point out that literacy is much more than, just reading. I know you know that, but just so that everybody recognizes that.
You can talk about that
But
more if you want to.
a lot of years ago, I actually did a presentation with a colleague of mine, Dina Zorko, on close reading.
Mhm.
And it was about not just looking at text, your traditional like written text, but looking at art as text, looking at video as text. Um, and yes, 100%. In
Totally.
order to be able
Mhm.
to talk about something, you need to understand what you're looking at
Mhm.
or know how to ask questions to get that going. So I we talk as language teachers about the modes of communication, um, and within that are the four skills: the speaking, reading, listening, writing. But in our everyday lives, we're practicing all three modes of communication: interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. And every time we interact with any content, we're using one of those skills.
Right.
And then it flows into yet another skill, right? So um, I don't know that this is exactly answering your question, but I don't think that we can totally separate, um, and I guess that's why it's multiliteracies. We need to look at the whole picture.
Absolutely.
Um,
100%.
you know, and when I look at technology, so, I could sit here and name, well, this is a technology I really like for really honing in and practicing receptive skills, or this is a technology I really like for honing in and practicing writing. So I could name apps that do that, but I think ultimately we have to take and this comes back to good pedagogy and scaffolding learning, is that we need to be doing all of those things, and one is going to lead to the other, and the order in which they happen is not always going to be the same. Um, but they should always interconnect. And what happens in a synchronous space with students should be connected to what happens when they're in an asynchronous space, when they're doing their homework or reviewing or whatever. So there should always be that sort of flow from one to the other. They shouldn't be disconnected.
I'm getting so
Um,
excited about the way that you're conceptualizing and voicing that interaction between the three modes and the four skills, and just how that leads to that interplay between language proficiency and multiliteracies, that ability to read, write, and think, and how they're all so deeply intertwined. Um, I
and we can't
wonder.
forget about intercultural also,
Absolutely.
because
Talk
that
more
that
about
gives
that.
you
Talk
the
more about
that
that.
gives you the context in which you're going
Yeah.
to do all of those things,
Well,
right?
talk a little bit more about
So
that. How does that affect our students?
so you know you when you're boy, I'm trying to figure out how to not go into all kinds of tangents here.
Tangent away.
But
No.
um when you're teaching students the three modes, they have to have a context in which you're working.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest misconceptions outside of the world language community is that all we do is teach words and structures.
Yes. Oh my
Mhm.
Right?
goodness. Say it again.
And
Preach
we
it.
teach so much more than words and cultures, or words and structures. And
Yes.
we teach cultures, we teach durable skills, we teach, all kinds of things. And I think, not that I want to point fingers or lay blame, but in a way, I kind of blame ourselves because we've referred to, oh yeah, I'm a Spanish teacher, I'm a French teacher. Well, okay, that sounds like words and structures. But what we really are global intercultural educators with an emphasis in French.
Yes.
I mean, why don't we call ourselves what we're actually doing?
Mhm.
And then people will see the broader picture of what happens in our classrooms. There are these, when students, well, high school and college, you have your electives and then you have your requirements,
Mhm.
and they're all based on, getting a certain number of credits in a particular, field. So you need so many science credits or so many math credits or so many English credits. Well, what if instead we got, we looked at all of the disciplines and said, okay, what durable skills does this course support? And students need to have so many hours of learning, collaboration and critical thinking and whatever. And they could learn critical thinking in a math class, but they could also learn it in a industrial arts class or in a language class.
You've got my vote. Do you think we could use AI to help do that?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Talk more about that.
100%.
Tell us more. You've got this visionary, innovative mind. I'm like, come on, come up with a plan. I know you've got one in there. You're dying to tell us.
Well, I mean, it really comes down to recognizing sort of the core outcomes that you're looking for as an educator, being willing to embrace change, not run from it, because I know a lot of it is not helpful to ban AI, just like it wasn't helpful to ban cell phones. It is not, because cell phones exist in the world. One of the funniest things that happened, I thought, when my kids were in high school, they're now, grown, and the youngest is about to graduate college. But when they were in high school, and middle school, Facebook was available. And so the school district had these Facebook feeds that they wanted all the parents to connect to so that they would know what's happening in the school community. And yet they would ban Facebook at the schools. I'm like, really? So you realized why this was useful, and that it's, as adult humans in society, that this is a way to communicate, but you're going to not only not teach students how to use it well, but you're going to prevent them from it. Right.
And I love that you're bringing that idea up of not running away from the tools, not fearing the change. Because I think a lot of that resistance to change is really fear, and it's based on, if I don't know what something can do, I'm scared of the negative that can come from it, I think. But I love this vision of, first of all, skills-based teaching, and second of all, I almost want to call it maybe not holistic. I'm trying to find a better word, but rather than doing I have my reading day, I have my writing day, I have, but having that
Culture
all-encompassing, I teach communication, I teach functional global skills.
Right.
And also pairing that with, we have these tools that we want to use. They're here to stay. AI is not going anywhere, whether we plug our ears, say la la la, and run away, or allow it to be part of our classroom. It's
Exactly.
there. But there
Exactly.
is that fear of like, how do I teach my students to use it responsibly? And I think the same exists with Facebook.
Right.
In
Right.
schools, how do we teach students to use these tools responsibly, to vet reliable information, to vet safety? I mean, giving
Mhm.
personal information to a bot can be really dangerous. I mean, I hear all these
Right.
fears with also data security. So when
Right.
you hear that resistance to change and that fear with teachers, do you have any advice in terms of what can we do to teach students to use it responsibly? Because we have
Right.
these tools, they're not going away and they're quite great.
Right. Yeah. And so the key is if you ban it, they're still going to use it. They're just going to hide it from you. So now
Mm-hmm.
you've taught them to lie. Well, we
Uh-huh.
don't want to do that. So that's not useful, right? So one of the biggest things that I think educators need to learn to do is to let go of some of the control.
Mm.
To recognize that without a doubt, they are masters of whatever their content area is. They know that better than their students. But the other things like learning how to use technologies, it's okay to be a learning partner with your students.
Oh, I love that
Yes,
term.
like
You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to like know everything. It's okay for a student to show you how to do something. And when you engage a student in that way, and that's why I really would like to see this sort of skills-based approach to education. If a student is engaged because it's an area of interest to them, they're going to learn more from it. So if you want a kid to be really engaged in critical thinking, problem solving, and you're going to throw Pythagorean theorem at them, but they could not have any idea what that means in their life. Or you could say, okay, here's this object that needs to fit in a container that's shippable. Let's try and design something that will do that and only weighs so much and only costs so much. They're going to do a lot of math, right? And they're going to be engaged in what they're doing because it feels more purposeful to them because they're interested. So that's where we as educators need to really allow, AI, you can ask AI, give me, I don't know, 5 examples of how a, let's see, how being an agricultural engineer, it would be useful to know Mandarin.
Mm.
And AI will spit that out,
Wow. Uh-huh.
right? And
Right.
so now we have a way to connect to the agricultural engineer. We could do the same thing and say, give me 5 examples of why an interior designer would want to use Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
So, and doing that, why is it, I'm sorry, I'm getting on my pedestal.
It's okay.
Why is it that we wait until like the 4th semester of language to start talking about and giving students the vocabulary for real careers? Why can't we do that in the first semester? Or whatever it is that they're interested in, age dependent, right?
Right.
There's no reason that we have to wait that long because we can get those vocabulary lists in a second. We don't have to wait till the certain chapter in a certain textbook gets to it. We just ask AI.
And we
Yeah.
can find resources that are comprehensible, level appropriate.
Exactly. It's
tasks that are
changing the
still
task.
right.
Yes, as long as
Change the
exactly,
task.
as long as we know their proficiency level and as long as we design the task, as you said, for their proficiency level and
Right.
moving them to the next one, it shouldn't matter too much what the context is. So I've heard you mention context multiple times. So real world context, coming back to a problem that needs to be solved and engagement. So those
Mhm.
to me have stood out as key
Yep.
drivers, and the pedagogy. So those have stood out to me as key drivers in your success and in your personal impetus in the role that you have. Would you agree with that? Are those some key drivers for you?
Definitely, definitely.
Okay.
And AI is allowing us to individualize and differentiate so much more easily than we ever could in the past that um we should be taking advantage of that. Um and if, we're as a field, there's been a pretty extensive decrease in the number of students for a number of reasons why students aren't choosing language. But if we were able to, one, keep it interesting from the beginning by those kinds of real world connections to the things that our students are interested in, and two, and this one I think, um, when we look at it as something that helps students learn skills, stop focusing on being a major or a minor and deciding to cut programs because there aren't enough majors or minors. Because languages and the skills you learn when you're learning a language support every other discipline, every discipline.
I
And
totally agree.
you
Yeah.
know
Mhm.
why one of the what I think is an innovation that I came up with in this program I direct is we're doing digital badging, and it all started with the stamp tests. The Avant stamp tests allowed us to identify the proficiency levels of all of our students in all four of the skills. It's missing culture, but that's, aside.
Well, we can work on that.
And and it then we started sending the stuff off to the global seal, so students who got intermediate, mid in all four skills, great, they got a global seal. But then we had all of these students that reached a level of proficiency, but maybe they weren't intermediate mid in all four of the skills. So I developed a digital badging system so that our students get badged in each one of those skills wherever they're at. And we were using
Yeah.
Badger, but I know Credly is another one that does it. But we developed badges, and they're tied to the can-do statements, the ACTFL can-do statements. All of that information is there. So the students now, in addition to having that on LinkedIn, they can go into an interview or a college application, and they can say, "This is what I can do in speaking, listening, reading, and writing in
That's
X
amazing.
language."
You are so
Um,
innovative. I feel like you're taking away from the like what I'm hearing from you is fewer silos, kind of fewer like it has to be this path, that
Absolutely.
path, or the other path, and more broader.
Build your own path.
Yeah, yes. I feel like that's maybe your motto. Build your own path, make your own way, do it, because and when Marnina described you as a pioneer, I had the exact same thought, but she said it before I could. She's a pioneer, so build your own path, and that's what I guess one reason why we want to talk to people like you is because we're trying to understand better where is the field going. Not Yes, we have to understand where we've been and where we are now, but we want to know where are we going? Where is the field
Yeah,
going? And what's next? And how can we help kids
right.
get there and do it better, right? Do it better for
Yep,
kids.
yep,
So with
yep, for
that, I
sure.
think you touched on people are taking language less because there's this, I don't need it, I have Google Translate. So, but that's missing a huge part, of course, like you said, of
Mhm,
skills, of competency, of human communication is gonna be here to stay.
mhm.
At least in my time, I'd hope. So where do you see it going next? What do you see as a pioneer? Like, what do you see as kind of the next phase we can look forward to? And I'm hoping some hopeful vision for language
Right, right.
language learning to stay, and what is that gonna continue to look like as someone who has kind of been ahead of the curve with technology from the start?
Yeah. Well, and some of it gets back to we need a name change. right? So people know what they're actually going to get out of a taking a language course. And we recently went through looking at all of the program booklets, so we would see what students thought that they were going to get out of our classes. Some of those have not changed in 10 or 15 years. It was frightening
Goodness.
what it said they were going to do, and it was all about grammar and stuff like that, not about what you're able to actually do.
Bless their
So,
hearts. That's what we would say
yeah,
here in the
I
South.
mean,
Bless
right,
their little
exactly. Bless your heart. But in a broader sense, I think, we're living in a global society. True proficiency isn't just the words you can say or you can write. It includes having a sense of the nuance, empathy, cultural understanding, all of that you would bring to a full conversation has to be there. And I believe that, if you're approaching language learning with that sort of proficiency mindset and growth mindset, focusing on what someone can do, and assessing for that, we can really shift sort of the educational ecosystem away from the idea of seat time. And we can make that shift towards the meaningful skill development and solving complex problems by understanding a different point of view that might be coming at the same problem and see something differently. And especially with AI, we have all of the facts we need at our fingertips. I don't need to memorize facts anymore, because if I don't know something, I can just say, "Hey Siri," or "Hey Google," right? And I can say and ask whatever question for a fact. That's easy. But those durable skills, the creativity, the problem solving, the critical thinking, all of that skill development, that requires a level of proficiency that impacts one's ability to connect with other communities and to come to understandings, and not, not turn towards just, fight, flight, but actually doing as much listening as you are talking, right? And trying to understand another perspective. That's not just facts. That's not just, speaking, reading, listening, writing. And that's what you need, those elements to have true communication and intercultural understanding.
Wow, that was beautiful, and that was beautiful, and I keep hearing you say the full conversation, and I think everything that you said is like, yes, it's the full conversation that encompasses all of those aspects that you just mentioned. It's not just anything in isolation. It's not just a language ability or four skills. It's the full conversation that includes that ability to empathize and listen. I mean, thank you. That was very powerful. So I think we're close to the end. So if there was one thing you wanted listeners to remember from today's conversation or just take with them, what would that be?
As educators, we talk about our students having growth mindset. We need to have a growth mindset as well. And we need to stop seeing language as this sort of siloed subject, that we do help students with foundational skills that support every discipline: engineering, medicine, rocket science, whatever. And we should be leaning into that as we focus on the durable skills and kind of, you know, re we don't it's not a reinvention of ourselves, but a reinvention of our name, so people understand who we are and what we do. Because if we can really do that, and we can use these technologies to help us engage learners earlier on, I think that we will grow a more interculturally responsive society, as well as have students who will want to continue to learn more for longer sequences than what we've traditionally had, if that makes any sense.
I
Right.
love that. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for bringing that inspiration, that vision, that energy of pioneering. I don't have a better word for it, but just this idea that we don't have to just fear that change and that there's exciting things ahead. So I've really enjoyed that inspiration from
Yeah.
you.
Absolutely. And I would say, Lauren, you are truly a visionary, and you've inspired me to think about renaming renaming our profession and I'm a big believer in that the fact that our system needs changes, and so you're helping me think about
Yeah.
how can we change this system. So
Yeah. Change
um
is hard. Wait 10 minutes. It'll get better.
yes. I like that.
I like that.
Well, so as we wrap up, I just wanted to say to our listeners, if you were intrigued by something in this episode and want to add to the conversation, comment below, and remember to like, subscribe, and share this podcast in your network.
All opinions expressed in this podcast and the comments are solely those of the individual and not necessarily those of Avant.